Hello there. Today we're reviewing Napoleon 1815 from Shakos, designed by Denis Sauvage in the Conquerors series. This is the same company that has released another game that I've reviewed on the channel, Saladin, even though this is quite a different game from that one. And we're going to talk a little bit about this game and about how it works, and then I'll give you my impressions. The game is the third in a series of Napoleon games. So the first game on the series was Napoleon 1906. Then there was 1806. Then 1807. And this is 1815. So this is the third game in the series. The three games, I haven't played the two previous games in the series, but I understand that they are quite similar, with some rules being adapted here and there. But I think I saw a high-level comparison between the three games, and I believe that the rules have been slightly tweaked / streamlined for this 1815 version of the game or game. The three games are standalone, but I believe you can somehow link them together with a campaign. I haven't done that, so this is the only game of the series that I've played. Talking about the components, so the game comes with a couple of few booklets. There's obviously the rule book, which I will show in a second. There's a scenario book, and the scenario book essentially explains the setup and then the different scenarios. Each 2 pages has a scenario. The game comes with I don't want to get this wrong. The game comes with 5 different scenarios, and one thing that I would emphasize right off the bat is that the scenarios are quite different. Even though it's the same map, and it's always the same map that you see here, the as you can see, this is starting positions. The scenarios are quite different. In some games, sometimes you have a few different scenarios, but they're just variations of the same scenario. They're just a shorter scenario or something like that. In this game, and I've played all 5 scenarios, the scenarios do feel all quite different. There's a scenario, the first one called Waterloo is a 3-turn scenario, so it's quite a short introductory scenario. But then the other scenarios last 8, 6, 10, and 10 turns, and those 4 scenarios especially feel all quite different. The setup that you see here is for scenario number 2, which is Ligny and Quatre Bras, which is 6 turns from June 16th, 1815 to June 18th, 1815. So that's the scenario booklet. There's also a quick start guide for those of you that don't want to, maybe you're not so comfortable with war games and you just want to get a quick overview of how to play this. This is a quick start guide that will fast track you to play the game. I actually haven't used it. Then the game comes with these 3 screens, one for the Prussians, one for the French, and one for the British. I'm going to show you the British one here. So this is a screen that you will use to hide your units, and it also acts as a player aid. So you have the game sequence here, and then you have movement, combat, etc. I'm not a big fan of this. I thought this is a great idea in the game, but it's not very easy to follow the iconography, and I actually found myself going more to the rule book than actually using this. It's slightly confusing in some points, so that's one of the criticisms that I have about this game, albeit not a big one. Then we have the map. The map is a mounted map, as you can see. It's a fairly small map, so the game is portable. It's quite portable, and as you can see, it's a good looking map, I would say, and the game also comes with these with these with the player raids, or they actually called it the orders of battle, where you're going to place your units and the strength of your units. The game is a block game ish, and I'm going to say ish because usually in block war games you're used to the Columbia system. This is slightly different. So this is a block, for example. This is Napoleon, and this is a British core. So the French blue, the English red, and the Prussians in black. And you can play the game in one of two ways. You can play the game either like it's set up now here, with the blocks facing up, where basically you can see who's who, or and by the way, in the blocks, once they're activated, so you see them like this. Once they're activated, you just flip them over to the other side. Or you can play, and this is an optional rule in the game, you can play with the blocks hidden from your opponent. So you would have the blocks standing like this. So in this case, the French player to the south can see the block, the English player cannot. And if the block is activated, the block gets flipped like this. So it's essentially the other side. As you can see, this means facing down means that it's been activated. So I'm showing you the game with the blocks all facing upwards, but I really would recommend that the game be played with hidden blocks, unless you're very, very new to war games and you really just want to play a couple of times like this. The order of battle is are these I have two examples here. This is the English orders of battle, player aid, and this is the French one. There's also a Prussian one, which I haven't set up here, just because of lack of space. And basically, what these are also mounted, by the way, and what these player aids will show you is your units, and they will show with these blocks, they will show you the strength. Where, for example, for the French, these blue blocks are infantry, the yellow blocks are cavalry. For the English, it's red and orange. And then just below that, you have the cylinders, and the cylinders are fatigue points. So for each unit, you will have, so for example, we have Kushi here. Kushi has, as you can see, one cavalry, one yellow block, and one cylinder, which means one fatigue. And as casualties mount, you're going to lose strength. You might get reinforcements. Fatigue will accumulate. Fatigue also means that you are going to lose strength eventually. I think the game has a strong component of fatigue management. Then there's another thing in the game that comes in the box, which is actually, you don't need it it's not related to play, but it's these bags, one for each side. So this is the English one, this is the Prussian one, and this is the French one. And these bags are used to store the blocks after you've finished playing. So these go inside the box. They actually have you don't use them to play, but you use them to store the blocks. Then you also have a bunch of dice, and I haven't even removed the dice from their bag, because playing with dice in this game is 100% optional. You can do exactly the same with the cards in the game, and that's the way I've been playing it. You don't need to play with the dice. You can if you want to, but you can do exactly the same thing with the cards, and I'll explain the cards in a second. It just means that you're going to cycle faster through the cards. Then we have a victory point marker here at the bottom, where you get to from 0 to 20, where 0 means victory for the French, 20 means victory for the coalition. and you've got these locations here on the map and connections between the locations. Your units are always in the locations, never in the connections. And you basically see that there's a few different types of units on the board. So there's, like, for example, here, these green ones are forests. You have fortified villages. You have fortified farms. You have towns, and others. And then you also have these control markers, like the one that you see here. These are control markers that indicate what faction is controlling that area. So for this case, we have Ath, which is worth 1 victory point. It's being controlled by the British. And you also have here these blocks that give you a defense advantage, because these denote a reinforced position. And then you have the turn track here, and if there's any reinforcements, the blocks are placed there. There's also a box here to put the invasion card, because each scenario is going to have an invasion card that sets some ground rules for the scenario. And essentially, it shows how far the French invasion is proceeding, or how far it has gone. In this scenario, which is, like I said, the second scenario, it means that it's invasion. The invasion card that you use is invasion +2, which gives you some information like the number of cards that each side draws, how you determine initiative, and if there's any limitations or special rules. So in this case, for example, in this scenario, the card tells us that the Anglo-Allied or Prussian Corps can't enter France. The game comes with 5 different invasion cards, so there's 4 others to use in other scenarios, from no invasion to invasion +4, which also keeps the scenario. This is another element that helps to keep the scenarios different enough and fresh. And I think there's enough variability in the game with the 4 scenarios, if we exclude the introductory scenario. Then a few concepts about the game. Any unit that you have on the board is a stack. One or more friendly units is a stack. And then you have two types of units. You have, and I'm going to show you here, you have the block on the left, Napoleon, as a star. That means that it is a commander. And Mouton doesn't have a star. That means that it's a corps. The commanders can never move without the corps. So if a commander always moves with a corps. So Napoleon here can never move by himself. He needs to move with either Mouton or any other corps or any other number of corps. And actually, a commander, if they ever find themselves alone due to elimination of the corps, the commander is eliminated. And the other element is, like I explained here, the order of battle is, it's going to be hidden from your opponent. So, like I said, you're going to use these screens to hide your order of battle behind it, and you're going to use this to check how much strength you have, how much fatigue you need to have, what are the penalties from the fatigue, etc., etc. The game comes with 2 decks of cards. So there's a deck of cards for the coalition and a deck of cards for the French. These are not shared decks, so these are completely separate decks. And there's a bunch of different cards. I'm not going to go through all of it, but just to give you an idea, basically there's these cards that have a red background. So you see here, delayed troops. With a red background, you need to play immediately during the draw phase of the turn, and I'll get to the turns in a second. But when you're drawing cards, if this comes up, you need to play for the event. Some of these cards will stay. Some of these red background cards will stay here for the duration of the turn, to denote that there's an event or something that will will be a permanent event during the round. Then we also have these green ones, like hussars here, the green background. The green background are cards that you can play for its event during the ops phase of the turn. And then finally we have the blue cards, and this is true on both decks, by the way. We have the blue cards, cards with the blue background. These can be played during the initiative phase of the game turn, which I will also explain in a second. Just as a for you to have an idea, and the game is all based on cards. It's card driven. But for example, if I take this card here, I knock down this marker. So this card here, Hussars, exemplifies how the cards are. Basically, we have, like I mentioned, this is a green card, so it can be played as an event during the ops phase. And it indicates here when the card can be played. So in this case, it can be played during an operation of the coalition player, even though this is a French card. You have the name of the event, obviously, Hussars. You have the movement points or the initiative phase. So in this case, a 3 for initiative or 3 for ops. You have the effect of the event. And then you have 2 boxes here. And by the way, this card is only used in a 3-player game. I forgot to mention, but this is a 2-player game, but it can also be played 3-player with slightly different rules. There's some cards that are only used in a 2-player game, some cards that are used in a 3-player game. Most of the cards are common. In a 3-player game, 2 players are playing with a coalition, one with the British and one with the Prussians. In a 2-player game, obviously, it's just coalition versus French. To be quite transparent, I've only played this game. I've played this game several times. I've only played it with 2 players, never played it with 3 players, but I'm sure it works still fine. I don't think this is a game that should be played solo. I don't think it's suitable for solo. So like I was mentioning, there's 2 boxes here at the bottom. The box on the left is the combat box, and it tells us what casualties or fatigue your opponent is going to suffer. So in this case, if this card is drawn, your opponent will suffer 2 fatigue. I'm going to try to find an example that shows. So this one, for example, your opponent will suffer 1 fatigue and 1 strength hit. And then on this side, we have the recovery phase. So this tells you how many points of fatigue you can recover during the recovery phase. So this card, you can recover 1 fatigue, which is simply you go here and you would remove, for example, for Cauchy here, you would remove this fatigue marker from your order of battle. The game has 4 phases, which I'll explain. So it's the draw phase, initiative phase, operations, and recovery. As you can imagine, most of the game is played in operations. So the draw phase, each player will draw a number of cards, as explained here in the invasion card. There's no hand limit, and if you draw a red card, you need to play that card immediately for its event. And you do not replace that card. So if you're drawing, for example, 3 cards, and one of your 3 cards is this one, you don't draw a replacement card. This is one of the cards that you actually drew, even though you need to play it. Interestingly enough, if a player draws more than 1 red card, or if both players draw each 1 or multiple red cards, then the events do not trigger, and all of those cards are discarded without effect. So that's something quite interesting, and that actually happens quite often. Then you have initiative. In initiative, what you do is you reveal a card from your deck. By revealing, it means it's not a card in your hand, it's a card at the top of your deck. You reveal it, and the number there will be the initiative number. So in this case, an initiative of 3. You compare it to your opponent's initiative. Higher initiative wins. If there's a draw, then the French player always goes first. Then we go into operations. Operations, at any time during operations, you can pass. If you pass, the only thing you can do for the rest of the game is to play a green background card for your opponent, like this one. So this is a French card, and you can play this one for green. So during ops for your opponent. So this is the only thing you can do for the rest of the turn. Obviously, you need to pass if you have nothing else that you can activate. But eventually, um, you will spend most of your time activating your units. Then your opponent goes, then you go, etc. I will explain the activation and what you can do with it in a second. But I will just explain the last phase, which is recovery. In recovery, you do a bunch of things. So if you have a core that has not been activated, which means that if you're playing with the blocks up side up, it means that the block is like this instead of being like this. If you're playing with the blocks hidden, it means that this side is facing upwards instead of like this, or same way of saying this instead of this. All fatigue points are removed from that core. So, for example, we see here Uxbridge has 4 fatigue markers. If Uxbridge hasn't been activated, all fatigue markers will come off, which is huge. And then for each of the other core, you can play 1 card from your hand, and only 1 per core, and you can remove the number of fatigue points that is on the right hand side for that core. So eventually you need to so you see the number of fatigue points. This one will remove 2 fatigue points, for example. So you need to balance activating with resting your units so that you can remove fatigue. And then fatigue kicks in. The fatigue effect kicks in after all of this, and you can see that on your player aid, on your orders of battle, there's a separation line here. You can also see it here. After the 4th point of fatigue. After the 4th point of fatigue, there's a symbol here, which means that you lose 1 strength, which is the same symbol that you see on the cards here. So if fatigue for a core is in excess of that line, then you lose 1 strength. What this means is, for example, let's say that Uxbridge has a 5th point of fatigue here. When it comes to recovery, they would lose a point of strength, which is obviously quite damaging, and it doesn't clear your fatigue. The fatigue is still there, so you need to try to clear it at some point, or you're just going to lose strength points. And strength points, by the way, are victory points for your opponent. And then you activate all the core, and you advance the turn marker in the game. The next turn continues, and there's going to be some conditions. There's a limited number of turns, etc. But we'll get to that. So in terms of the operations, you can do 2 things with the operations. You can either move, or you can attack, or you can do moving combat. So essentially, you're going to activate a stack. You're going to say, I'm activating, for example, this stack, which is Napoleon and the core of Mouton. And you're going to reveal a card. Again, it's not a card from your hand. It's a revealed card. You're going to reveal a card, and you're going to check the movement points. So in this case, that stack is going to have 3 movement points. The 3 movement points are then going to be modified by a bunch of things. I'm not going to cover all of them. It's in the rule book. It's also in the aid, even though, like I said, I don't like the way the aid has this lined out. But you're going to basically subtract 1 movement core, one movement point per core above the first. So in this case, Napoleon is a commander, Mouton is a core, so you wouldn't lose anything. But if your stack was like this, you would lose 1 movement point because you have 2 core. So the bigger your stack, the harder it will be to move. So you lose 1 movement point. There might be green event cards that either enhance your movement or hinder your movement. If you have a core with this symbol here, which is a little soldier, and the core is alone, you get +1 movement point for that core. If Napoleon is in the stack, you get +1 movement point, and a few other things. It might happen that you actually can't move the stack because at the end of all of this, you have 0 movement points, but the stack was still activated. And this is kind of uh, there's a little element of chance here because you might get a 3 movement card, or you can get a 1 movement card, and then maybe you're not even able to move. So it really depends on your card draw. But you need to kind of think that you might draw a card that has very low movement. This one, for example, has 5 movement. And you never know if you're going to get a good movement card or not. So you need to plan accordingly for that. And then you're going to move. And moving means that you're going to move the stack along a number of positions. So let's say that Napoleon and Mouton could move 3 positions. The stack would move, for example, 1, 2, 3. You're not forced to move 3. You can move 2 or 1 in this case. In this example, any movement that you don't use, you basically lose. And you need to stop in a few scenarios. You need to stop if you come across a friendly unit. So if there was a friendly unit here, you do 1, 2. Actually, you need to stop here. You can't move there. And you also need to stop if there's an enemy stack where you stop. If you control a fortified town while moving, you need to stop on the fortified town. You control the fortified town, so the marker the control marker would be flipped to your side, to your color. We have a French control marker here, Prussian control markers there. You would control that fortified town. You would get the VPs, and the VPs are written on the map, so it's quite handy because they're written on the map just next to the town. And you would lose 1 fatigue point for control. So you need to lose a fatigue point to control a fortified town. And then you're gonna check for fatigue because, like I said, the game is all about managing fatigue. And if there's one thing that I've learned about the game is that in the beginning, you probably feel like, oh, this is my armies are fresh. There's no issues with this. But then quickly it will snowball, and you're gonna run into problems, and then you're gonna have high fatigue, and you're gonna have to prioritize what to activate and what to recover, etc., etc. So basically, there's an allocation of fatigue. So you're going to get 1 fatigue point per corps per each movement above the 3rd movement. Even if you were able to move, for example, I don't know, 5, every movement above 3 will it's like a forced march, so you will incur fatigue. If you are moving away from a contested area, you're going to suffer fatigue. If you end your movement in a contested area, so for example, if you're moving here into this area where a hill is at, you're going to suffer 1 fatigue. And then there's cards. Green cards might add fatigue or diminish fatigue. Napoleon or Wellington will decrease the fatigue points by 1, and then you're going to allocate the fatigue. Again, these cylinders here, you're going to allocate the fatigue to the cores in that stack, and you need to equally distribute the fatigue. So you can't allocate it to, I don't know, Picton to save Uxbridge. If you have 2 fatigue points, you would need to give 1 to Picton, 1 to Uxbridge. If you only have 1 fatigue point or 3 fatigue points, then you can decide what core to give. So you need to allocate, equally distribute it, but then any balance you do whatever you want with it. And the other one is there's going to be what's called an axis of retreat, which is basically when you enter the contested area. So like in this example, Napoleon's stack moved here. This is a contested area. This would be their axis of retreat, which is basically where they came from. So the axis of retreat are these arrows, which indicate where you would need to retreat. Doesn't mean that you will need to retreat, because you can always win the battle, obviously, but it indicates where you need to retreat. the axis of retreat, I won't get into it, but you basically get the idea. And then there's combat. Combat can be triggered in one of two ways. One is there's a contested area here. Just because there's a contested area doesn't mean that combat is triggered. So in this case, Napoleon and the two corps, Ney and Mouton, moved here over to where Hill is. They ended the movement. They ended the turn, but actually nothing happens necessarily. When there is a contested area in in this case, either Hill, either the British or the French could decide to start combat. So the player that starts combat is called the attacker, even if it's Hill. So in the British turn, if Hill wants to attack Napoleon, even though there's a big difference in strength here in this particular example, but the player who is attacking is the attacker. The other player is the defender. And this can be done at any time. And I'm saying this because it can happen that Napoleon moved from here to 1, 2, 3 axis of retreat. Napoleon decides to not attack, and I'll explain why. And then in the next turn, Hill actually decides to leave the contested area. They would suffer, like I mentioned, a penalty point because a fatigue penalty point because they were leaving a contested area, but they would they would avoid a battle that looks a bit unbalanced. And so anyone can decide to attack. The other thing is that there can be what's called a moving attack, which is in this case the movement Napoleon 1, 2, 3, and then still on my turn I say I want to attack. This is called a moving attack, which obviously carries a penalty because you're doing two things in the same turn. But this is where either the cards or the dice come in. But essentially, taking the card example, you're going to determine the number of cards that you're going to reveal according to a number of modifiers. So, first of all, players can play one event with a green background that has this symbol, because this is the combat symbol. So these cards can only be played for their event during combat. So, for example, this one, a French stack performing a moving attack during an operation doesn't lose one card during combat. So that's actually quite good if you're doing a moving attack. And then you are going to add one or two cards for each corps there according to your strength. And again, this line here on your player rate, on the orders of battle, determines how many cards you're going to get. So if your strength is to the left of this line, you get one card and it's noted there. If it's to the right, you get two cards. So in this case, for example, Napoleon would give you one card because that's fixed. Mouton would give you another card because he's to the left of the line. That's two cards. And then Ney would give you another card because also to the left of the line. If Ney had more strength, let's say Ney was like this, then you would get two cards for Ney instead of one. You basically you're going to subtract one card from the total if you did the moving attack that I was explaining about, and then if you have fatigue over this line, like the Uxbridge example there, you actually reduce one card. So again, another point why high fatigue is bad. You would reduce one card. And then there's some other modifiers. If you're a defender in a wooded area, you get one more card. If you're a defender in a fortified town with a control marker, you get one card. If the coalition is defending with one of these reinforced markers, you get plus one card. You get the bonus of the commander, like I mentioned here. Napoleon gives you plus one card. And you add all of this up and you draw a number of cards. Players simultaneously draw a number of cards, and they are going to basically add up the boxes here at the bottom. So I'm just gonna say, for example, this The coalition player here would draw 2 cards, and both players would simultaneously reveal the cards, and then what counts for the combat is this area here. So in this case, the French player would inflict 1 strength casualty on the opponent and 3 fatigue points. So we're gonna add these up, and you're gonna lose strength. You're gonna add fatigue, and then the winner of the combat is whoever inflicted the highest number of losses. If there's a tie, then there is no winner or loser. And actually, you will lose strength. You will add fatigue, but the situation stays as it is, so no one is forced to retreat. So there can be more combat next turn. And then the retreat has some rules. Obviously, you need to retreat away from the contested area. If you have an access to retreat, you need to retreat through there, and you might suffer some penalties. And then this is where cavalry comes into play. If the winner has more cavalry strength than your opponent, then there's going to be a pursuit. You're going to add more cards, and you're going to be able to give more fatigue to your opponent. Fatigue, but not strength casualties. So that's the difference between these yellow blocks and the yellow squares and the blue squares, or here the orange versus red. So there's cavalry pursuit. So it's always good to have more cavalry strength than your opponent, because you're going to be able to inflict some more fatigue. And then the other thing is, in terms of fatigue that I haven't mentioned, is if your fatigue points for a corps, so let's say Uxbridge would have a few more points of fatigue here. If they ever reach this skull, the entire corps is eliminated, and if in that area there's only one commander, there's a commander, and there's no more corps, the commander is also eliminated. This is the game in a nutshell. There's a few other things. There's also the cavalry vedettes that can be used. This is an optional rule. I recommend using it. These are blocks that to your opponent. You need to play this with Fog of War, obviously, but to your opponent, these look like regular blocks, but they're just vedettes. So there's some bluffing there. I would recommend playing with that as well. So I would recommend playing with both the hidden blocks, the Fog of War, and with the vedettes for a richer experience. And then how do you win the game? How you win the game by looking at the victory points. So every time that an opponent loses a strength point, either because of combat casualties with this, either because of combat casualties, or because of excessive fatigue. So if again fatigue is over this limit here, you lose a strength point. Your opponent gets 1 victory point for each fatigue, for each strength that your opponent lost. So basically, you're going to move this marker upwards to the side of the French, or downwards to the side of the coalition. When you place a control marker in some certain areas on the map that have a number, you win that number of victory points. So you see there Brussels with 2 victory points, Ath 1 victory point, Namur 2 victory points, etc., etc. And the other one is if the coalition player ever has 7 control markers on the game board. So right now it has 5, as you can see, 5 red flags. If you have 7 at the end of the turn, you get a victory point. If Napoleon is in battle and loses that battle, then the coalition player wins 3 victory points. So Napoleon is quite powerful, but it gives a boost to your corps, but you need to be careful to protect him. If Wellington or Blücher are eliminated, the French player gets 2 victory points, and I will show you Wellington. This is the Wellington block, and this is the Blücher block. So 2 victory points if any of these, if one of these is eliminated, and finally, if the number of victory points ever gets to 20, the coalition wins. If it ever gets to 0, the French win. There's on some scenarios. There's usually the number of turns that you need to play. So you check the number of points at the end of the turn. So there's a victory condition. And at the end of the game, if no player has won at the end of the number of turns, no player has won, then the coalition wins the game. Because it's basically the same in all scenarios. And there's a final special case, which is if Napoleon is eliminated, the coalition player immediately wins the game. So if Wellington or Blücher are eliminated, your opponent gets the French get 2 victory points, but they don't automatically win the game. If Napoleon is defeated in battle, the coalition gets 3 victory points. But if Napoleon is eliminated, then it's a sudden victory for the coalition. Another reason to protect Napoleon. In terms of the game review, I think this is a very interesting game. Like I said, I haven't played the other games from the series, but I think this is the most recent one. So this is the one you probably should buy if you're interested. This is a light Napoleonics game that still has it's quite easy to learn. But it has enough meat, as you can see, that it is quite an interesting game. I have mixed feelings about the components. I think the components are quite good, generally speaking. The cards are good. The board looks beautiful. I think these order of battle player rates are a bit fiddly. I just think they're a bit fiddly, and setup takes some time. And because it's a small board, it doesn't take a lot of space, but it feels a bit small, and the blocks are also quite small. And if you have a lot of blocks in one place, and you're playing with the blocks hidden, you're gonna struggle with the space. So I would have liked to see a slightly bigger board and slightly larger blocks. This is not a deal breaker though, but it's just an observation. I think it's a fun game. It has a lot of back and forth. I think it's a game that strikes a really good balance between being a game for people who are just getting into war games to learn. As you can see, the rule book is quite short. So I think we have of actual rules. We have 2 pages. So we have to set up 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 pages of rules, including the 2 optional rules for fog of war and vedette, cavalry vedette. So it's quite easy to learn, but it packs a punch to keep you entertained. Also, because I mentioned the variability with the scenarios, which also adds something extra. And like I said, I'm not in love with the player rates and a few other things on the components, but I think it's a really solid game. I think it's fun. It's very easy to learn. It does take a couple of sessions to make sure that you are applying all the modifiers to movement, all the modifiers to combat, and that you're not forgetting something. And that's where I think that better screens would come in handy. More intuitive screens would have come in handy. But anyways, you can download something from the internet or from Board Game Geek, some player aids or something to help with that. But I think it's a really good game. And it's if you're interested in Napoleonics, and if you want a medium complex, light to medium complexity game, certainly light for war game, this is, I think, a very good option. And on a scale of 0 to 10, I will give it an 8 and recommend this game. Thank you.